The story begins deep in a quiet town where a young woman named Nancy is crouched in the bushes, visibly shaken. She's just discovered she's in the early stages of pregnancy. Overwhelmed and unsure of what to do, she confides in her best friend, Samantha. When Samantha gently asks who the father might be, Nancy admits she doesn't know. She's been casually involved with a few of her male friends. It's a consequence of her carefree lifestyle, and now she's left confused, anxious, and unable to pinpoint the father. Nancy works the afternoon shift at a local restaurant. Running late, she changes her clothes right in the car, blasting music to distract herself. But suddenly, her car breaks down, forcing her to leave it on the roadside and walk the rest of the way. On her way, she runs into her coworker Bobby, who's biking to work as usual. With no other choice, Nancy hitches a ride on his bike to avoid being late. Arriving at the restaurant, she reports to her father, the owner, who recently promoted her to manager. He reminds her to stay disciplined and set an example for the staff. Later, he tells her he's going out for the evening on a date with his new girlfriend. Since Nancy's mother passed away years ago, her father's been seeking companionship. He asks Nancy to cover the closing shift, and she agrees. As she clears tables, a plate of leftover beans and eggs triggers sudden nausea. She rushes to the restroom to vomit. Jake, the restaurant chef and her father's longtime friend, notices and begins to suspect the real reason. Moments later, Nancy's father unexpectedly walks in. Thinking quickly, Jake covers for her, blaming her sickness on a bag of spoiled meat, sparing her from uncomfortable questions. Nancy returns to the floor just as her father leaves. She's barely holding it together when PY, a coworker with a developmental condition, spills water. Instead of snapping, Nancy handles it gently, knowing he didn't mean to. But just then, a familiar group of teenagers, troublemakers known around town, pull up on their bikes. Not wanting them to cause problems, Nancy steps outside to chase them off. Lately, her pregnancy has made her more irritable and reactive, and she ends up scolding not just the teens, but also her coworkers, Jake, Bobby, PY, and two others, for doing nothing to help. Jake tries to calm her down, saying the teens were probably just messing around. But Nancy, feeling disrespected and on edge, fires Jake on the spot, even though he's the restaurant's main chef and her father's trusted right-hand man. Shocked, Jake pleads with her, explaining that he's drowning in debt and desperately needs the job. But Nancy, wanting to assert her authority, refuses to back down. After the confrontation, she retreats to the restroom, trying to collect herself. Bobby comes to check on her, but she snaps at him too, telling him not to pretend like he cares. With Jake gone and no backup staff, Nancy is forced to manage the night shift entirely on her own. She calls her father to tell him what happened. He's stunned that she fired Jake so suddenly, reminding her that while the restaurant menu isn't complicated, Jake's experience and skills are hard to replace. But with bills piling up and business slow, closing early isn't an option. Nancy decides to stay open through the night. With no customers around, she plays music, turns on the disco lights, and dances alone to shake off her stress. That's when she notices the teens' bikes parked outside again. Fearing they're back to stir up trouble, she grabs the microphone and threatens to call the police. This time, the teens bang on the windows, escalating the situation. Now truly alarmed, Nancy calls the police. But the officer on the line tells her that all nearby units are tied up responding to a brutal murder. Only one officer might be able to come, and it will take time. With no choice, Nancy braces herself, determined to defend the restaurant. Moments later, the teens begin terrorizing her again. She hides in the kitchen, frantically searching for her phone, paralyzed with fear. Then finally, sirens. Relief washes over her as a police officer arrives, investigates the scene, and notes small but odd signs, like a dripping faucet. Nancy tells him about the masked teens on bicycles. That's when the officer's expression darkens. He tells her something chilling. Those teens match the description of suspects from the earlier murder: violent, masked, and traveling on bikes. The people Nancy confronted tonight aren't just pranksters, they're the same killers the police have been tracking. As the officer escorts her to safety, Nancy realizes that the night is far from over. Just as Nancy and the police officer prepare to leave, the masked teens suddenly return, surrounding the restaurant. The officer urges Nancy to get to safety, but before she can react, one of the teens stabs him to death. Terrified, Nancy dashes into the storage room and hides. Out of nowhere, Bobby appears, confused and breathless. Nancy yanks him inside for safety, but the masked attackers quickly find them. They're captured, tied up, and forced to kneel face to face. Nancy refuses to give up. When she's dragged to the back, she seizes a moment of opportunity, cuts herself free, and stabs one of the attackers before fleeing. In the chaos, as one of the attackers backs into her on a bicycle, Nancy instinctively defends herself, only to realize she's accidentally stabbed PY. In that moment of horror, everything falls into place. Jake, Bobby, and even Petey were in on it. Earlier that day, after Nancy fired Jake, she had no idea he was hiding a dangerous secret. He wasn't just stressed about bills, he was a drug addict, spiraling deeper into trouble. Petey, his younger brother, often got dragged into his chaos. One night, unable to pay his dealer, Jake threatened him with a gun stashed in his glove box. On his drive home, high and furious, Jake stumbled upon a group of masked teens gathered around a bonfire. Enraged that they'd gotten him fired, Jake snapped. He stabbed one of the teens and gunned down the others. Petey, unaware of the full scope of what his brother had done, was forced to help Jake clean up the mess. They loaded the teens' bikes and masks into Jake's car. Jake then instructed Petey to head to the restaurant while he met up with Bobby and Bobby's older brother at their house. There, Jake vented about Nancy's outburst and came up with a plan to scare her. He'd use the stolen masks and bicycles to stage a prank. Bobby and his brother agreed, unaware of the massacre behind Jake's story. When asked about the gear, Jake casually said he borrowed it, leaving out the gruesome truth. Meanwhile, at the restaurant, Petey, his hands still stained with blood, rinsed off at the back faucet, which explained the dripping water the officer had noticed. Later that night, Jake and the others arrived, wearing the masks and riding the bikes, terrorizing Nancy while hiding behind the building. When the officer arrived, they stayed hidden until Jake, fearing discovery, struck the officer from behind. As chaos unfolded, Bobby glimpsed Nancy's terror. Racked with guilt, he removed his mask and pretended he'd just shown up to help. But the damage had already been done. When Nancy stabbed Petey, she realized how deep Jake had dragged everyone into his madness, including innocent people. Reflecting on it all, Nancy began to question herself. Had she overreacted when she fired Jake? Could this have been prevented? Later, Jake ordered his brother to guard Nancy, while he and Bobby tended to Petey's injury. But when Jake's brother turned his back, Nancy escaped. She stumbled upon the same bag of rotten meat Jake had blamed for her earlier nausea and had an idea. As Jake tried to stop Petey's bleeding, Bobby, realizing they were in too deep, quietly took the officer's car keys, hoping to escape. Meanwhile, Nancy's father, still out on his date, kept calling Jake after hearing about the firing. He insisted Jake should return to work and ignore Nancy's decision. But Jake had already gone too far. His phone, left behind in the car, would never receive the call. Back at the restaurant, Nancy was being hunted again. Jake's brother found her, but Nancy fought back, pushing him into a deep fryer, killing him instantly. Hiding under a table, Nancy spotted Bobby's lifeless body. Jake had killed him too. Just then, Samantha arrived, having received Nancy's earlier call, but she froze, paralyzed by the blood-soaked scene. Jake didn't wait. He chased Nancy into the back room as dawn finally crept across the windows. Nancy made a desperate dash for the exit, but Jake caught up and stabbed her in the back. She collapsed, helpless, as he dragged her limp body back inside the restaurant. He cruelly pressed down on her abdomen before walking out, unaware of her pregnancy. But Nancy wasn't dead. Moments later, she slowly opened her eyes. She was in pain, weak, but alive because she had taken a clever precaution. Earlier, she'd wrapped that rotten meat around her stomach, using plastic wrap as padding. That disgusting, rotting mess had absorbed the force of the knife. Jake's attack wasn't as fatal as he thought. Wounded but determined, Nancy confronted Bobby, who was barely clinging to life. It's here she finally told him the truth. The baby she was carrying was his, from a party they'd both attended. Her eyes burned with newfound determination. She took the officer's car keys and made her way to Jake's house. This time, she struck first. Approaching from behind, Nancy ended Jake's reign of terror. Exhausted, bleeding, but finally free, she limped back to the restaurant. Her father soon arrived, stunned by what had happened. The chaos was over. Moral of the story? If you're running a restaurant and trying to hold it together, maybe don't fire the only guy who can cook. He might just turn out to be the one person who could save you from a group of masked teens and an empty stomach. So that's it. Hope you enjoy the story. Subscribe and press the bell icon for more videos.